Hello friends, welcome to Shiksharthi. In this video, we shall be discussing the basics and concepts of time, distance and speed. So let's start. Now if you have gone through my first video on time, distance and speed, wherein I have talked about the application or the amalgamation of ratio, proportion and variation in a chapter like time, distance and speed, I hope that would have given you further insight on the topic or of the topic. Taking it further, so there we were talking about absolute velocity, absolute displacement, absolute time, or we talked about speed, distance and time. So either you focus on this or you focus on this, does not make much of a difference unless we are talking about those terms. So when we are talking about velocity, we will not use a word like distance. If we are talking about speed, we would not talk about displacement, because there is a difference between distance and displacement, and the difference, if I were to talk from a layman's perspective, is distance has only a magnitude or let us say a number with an associated unit, but when I talk about displacement, it has a number of, let's say a number associated with its unit and then the direction of travel also. In a short, in talking in layman's term only, displacement is the shortest distance between 2 points. Shortest distance between 2 points is displacement. Okay, which always would be having a direction associated. So you would always say that if I have to go from this point, let's say at this point to this point, and if I'm talking about the shortest possible distance, then it always comes with a direction. For example, if I have to see, if I talk about a right angle triangle, the shortest distance between 2 points may be the 2 points which are not successive to each other, may be the hypotenuse. Okay, so now in this session we'll be focusing on the average velocity or the average speed is what I'm going to talk about. So let's see how to talk about average speed. Okay, in the very beginning, what is average speed? So let's say if I have to say average speed. So what is average speed? Average speed is nothing but total distance upon the total time taken to travel the same distance. Now when I say average speed, another way to understand why am I using a word like average? Now the word like average is used to denote something done in parts, and how many parts? Maybe 2 or more parts, but eventually it gets converted into one part only, one unit only. So for example, if I say that so there are few things that we would like to talk about here. So let's say that the first concept that I'm going to talk about here is, let's say the first concept here says I'm supposed to calculate the average velocity, or let's say average speed of a body, of let's say a particle or a body or a medium. Let's combine all these things and let's put it under the head of entity. Now this entity could be a medium, this entity could be a body, this entity could be anything for that matter of fact. So when I'm calculating the average speed of an entity, that basically could be what? Either, now I know that speed is directly proportional to distance, and there is a logic behind this. So when I say that before watching this video, you should see the video on the first video which talks about the application or the amalgamation of ratio, proportion and variation, it makes sense because we'll be using the concepts furthered here. So average speed, now in this case, one is I can talk about average speed when I cover, let's say in terms of a distance. So average, the concept of average comes into picture only when we talk about 2 or more speeds. So when I'm talking about average speed, I'll say I talk about calculating the average speed for this journey, let's say. Now when I am using a word like journey, I need to have at least 2 or more speeds. Now when I am having 2 or more representation of speeds, in that case this 2 or more speeds can be covered in 2 or more distances. So either this will be covered in 2 or more distances. So let's say now when I'm talking about the first discussion here, let's say this is discussion A. So when I'm talking about 2 or more speeds, then only the concept of average speed comes into picture. Now these 2 or more speeds may be equal or may be unequal. That is not the point of contention. The point to understand here is when I'm talking about 2 or more speeds which are equal or unequal in magnitude. Other than that, this could be when I talk about distance, 2 or more distances, distance of travel. Second B part here is when I am talking about 2 or more. So when I am talking about distance of travel, that means here something time is kept constant. And when I am talking about 2 or more parts which are to do with the time of travel. Mind it, this is very, very important because in most of the examinations you get you're supposed to calculate the average or the mean speed. Now there is a very small difference between mean and average. And what is that small difference? When you talk about average, in that case the ratio of the involvement of this variable. Now this is the variable you are talking about. So, or let's say this is the frequency which you are talking about, and the variable here is speed. So when you are talking about speed as a variable, average of x, now you talk about average of x only when the ratio which is the occurrence of those variables is 1:1:1. And we know that now average is a subset of mean. So mean will, so when I'm talking about ratio as 1:1:1 only, then only you talk about the word, you use the word like average, which you analogously or synonymously you can say that this is the mean speed also. But when I talk about a ratio like 1:2:3 and so on, in that case you will never call it as average speed. You will call it as mean speed. And I'll explain this to you when I take, I explain this with the help of an example. So first we'll talk about case A. So let us say that there are 3 speeds which are given to you, and mind it, I'm using this in lower case. Let's say speed of 40 km/h. Second speed that I'm taking here is, let's say, 60 km/h. And the third speed that I'm taking here is, let's say, 80 km/h. Okay, and somebody tells me, so let's say I'm supposed to visit a place, and I hope the question becomes easier to understand, or the concept becomes easier to understand if you're able to take a real life situation. Now when you take a real life situation, please understand it like this. Let's say that I'm supposed to go to Lonavala from Mumbai, and let's say Navi Mumbai. If I'm supposed to go to Lonavala from Navi Mumbai, and I cover this distance in 3 parts. Now when I say that I covered this distance in 3 parts, the very first thing that should come to my mind is, okay, what was the average speed or the mean speed for the entire journey? And why does this thing come into picture is because I am talking about averages. So you can watch my videos on averages, mixtures and allegations separately, so that you can have a broader insight on this, or a further insight on this. Okay, now why did this happen? Because we talked about the concept of averages comes into picture only when we talk about 2 or more speeds here. Otherwise I could have talked about average time, I could have talked about anything in terms of the variable that I am discussing. So here the variable is speed. First. Second point here is, now when somebody is interested in knowing, okay, you went from Navi Mumbai to Lonavala, what is the average speed that you clocked from the vehicle? Let's say I'm driving, I'm using a car to travel from Navi Mumbai to Lonavala. So now the first is, okay, average speed. The next thing that should come to my mind or anybody's mind is, okay, when you are supposed to calculate your average speed, first calculation you can do it in terms of the distance that you covered. So you covered distance of 60 kilometers. Let's say it in 3 parts. So let's say the first part you covered it with an average speed of, or let's say with a speed of 40 km per hour. And let's say the distance was 20 kilometers. The second distance also, let's say, was 20 kilometers. And the third part of the distance that you covered again was 20 kilometers. Now, since all the 3 parts are equal, let's say trisection, we are talking about 3 parts being equal. So we talked about when there are 2 or more parts which are equal, and then those parts are in equal ratios. Because here you are calculating average speed with respect to the distance that you had covered in those 3 parts. So here now you will talk about average speed only. So this, let's say this discussion is A1. So when I am calculating the average speed, I'll say what? I'll say the total distance traveled divided by the total time taken to travel. So this will be 20 plus another 20 kilometers plus another 20 kilometers divided by the time taken. So this becomes basically what? This becomes D1 plus D2 plus D3 divided by T1 plus T2 plus T3. So what is the first time that you would take? You know that time is nothing but, time is what? Distance upon speed. So the first time that you would take is 20 divided by 40. Second time taken to travel. So maybe you can write it down here itself. T1 is nothing but 20 divided by 40. T2 is nothing but 20 divided by 60. And T3 is nothing but 20 divided by 80. This is how you calculate the average speed for this entire journey, which is why I had used this word specifically. So now in this case you can eventually say you can take 20 as common. So this eventually comes out to be 3 divided by 1 by 2 plus 1 by 3 plus 1 by 4 and whatever it comes out to be. So let's say in this case, how much will it come out to be? Now if I am doing this, I have to take 20 as common here. 3 into 20, and here this is 1 by 2, 1 by 3 and so on. So this is eventually like saying, so when I take the LCM of this, this is 12, 6 plus 4 plus 3. 6 plus 4 plus 3. So eventually I can write it as, this is nothing but 720 divided by 13 km per hour, which in any case is lesser than 60 km per hour. Let's see whether we did this correctly or not. So when we are saying this, I mean eventually when I see that the average should come out to be a 60 only. No. Why should the average come out to be a 60? It will not. So now the second case that I am going to talk about here is, I am doing nothing but the extension of this only, wherein the speeds are nothing but 40 km per hour, 60 km per hour and 30 km per hour, 80 km per hour. But the distance that I am taking, so let's say first 10 kilometers the car traveled at an average speed of 40 km per hour. The second, let's say 20 kilometers, or let's say 30 kilometers, and finally 20 kilometers. So we'll be using the same logic, and now we know that here I will not use a word like average speed, because when I take the ratio of the distance which is being covered here, so when I take the ratio of the distance comes out to be 1:3:2, and in this case the ratio of the distance came out to be a 1:1:1, which is why I used a terminology like average here. But what is the terminology that I am going to use here? I'll talk about a terminology like mean speed for the journey. Now when I am talking about the mean speed for the journey, would be total distance Now I'll be using ratios. So here I had used absolute values, but we always need to progress in life. So maybe if you can learn a better method efficient, is an efficient one which helps you to save time. So can I say 1 plus 2 plus 3, which is 6, or 6x, and then you're talking about x, which is 1 divided by 40 plus 3 divided by 60 plus 2 divided by 80, and then eventually you can say this is nothing but 6, 1 divided by 40 plus 1 divided by 20 plus 1 divided by 40, and when I see that I'm getting a 40 again, so this I can write it as 40, and eventually you can say this is 240 divided by 4, which is 60 km per hour. Now time to assimilate entire thing. So now when I'm calculating the average speed of the body or the particle or whatever of the journey, in that case it will be the harmonic mean, and this is the formula for harmonic mean. What is the formula? So you will say that this is nothing but d1 plus d2 and so on till dn. You talk about the harmonic mean of the speeds. So let's say speed divided by d1 up plus d2 up and so on till dn divided